What's up, everyone? Welcome back to Conflicts of Interest. This is episode 156. I'm the host, Kyle Anzalone. On today's show, I'm talking about the end of the U.S. occupation of Afghanistan. The last flight of U.S. soldiers flew out of the country, and Biden does pledge to continue to bomb Afghanistan, but the most significant phase of the 20-year war in Afghanistan has now come to an end. So I'll be breaking down what that means, and then I also got some other news on China and Yemen to talk about on today's show. Be sure to share the show. Everyone, I know you guys have been doing it a lot. The numbers for the show are way up. August was the best month of the show, and me and Will really don't want to just keep the audience that we've built, but to continue the momentum, to continue to grow. And we do that with you guys recommending the show to more people. It has just an awesome cyclical effect where me and Will then end up getting on more podcasts, getting our voices out there to new listeners and growing the show that way as well. But it really starts with, our audience talking us up out there, recommending the show, recommending other shows they like for to have us on as guests. And it's paid off really big in this past month. And so again, help us keep up this momentum. Continue to share this show. It's hosted at the Libertarian Institute, so that's where you find the show and the daily news roundup that I write. It's all there on the homepage. The full show notes there, everything. We put the video version as well as clips on YouTube, Rumble, and Odyssey. And then we post everything we do on our social media accounts at Facebook, MeWe, and Twitter. If you want to donate to the show, help us improve some equipment. There are things about the show we can improve, even though we think we bring you the best news. If we could do it at a higher quality show, we absolutely love to do that. So if you would love to see that, donate Patreon or Subscribestar. We also have crypto donation info in the show notes page. Check it out. Another way you could help the show out is by doing your CBD shopping at Paloma Verde. Paloma Verde has some of the best CBD products on the market, and you could verify that because they put their lab tester results for their product right there on their website. For anybody who's familiar with CBD, they have absolutely anything you could want. If you're new to CBD, they have a nice educational section on the website where you can figure out what CBD products may work best for you. I've tried pretty much everything they have at Paloma Verde, except the stuff for your dog, which they do have if your dog could benefit from some CBD. But I've tried all the human products, the extracts, the soft gels, the gummies, all work great. But the thing I, experience most is some back and muscle pain. And so I use the sports cream most days. The bottle lasts a long time. It lasts so much longer than the other products you get, at the regular stores, the Bengays, that kind of stuff. It doesn't have the smell. It has a nice menthol smell. It doesn't have the extreme temperature changes of some products. Maybe a little bit of a cooling sensation, but that's about it. And it works for a long time, and it works quickly. So check out their great lineup of products over at Paloma Verde. Just be sure to use the promo code PEACE, PEACE, when you check out. That gets you 25% off when you spend $75 or more, and it gets the show a kickback. All right, let's get into it. And again, starting off with the big news out of Afghanistan, and that is the last of the U.S. troops have exited the country. I believe the last man on the ground was Major General Donahue. And he stepped off just before midnight. So the official, end of the U.S. occupation comes on August 30th, just hours before midnight. Of course, on the show, we're celebrating our 1-year anniversary on that day. So with the Afghan War checked off our list, we're now setting our sights on the war in Afghanistan, gonna bring that thing down, and then the war in Yemen is the one we're targeting to try to bring down the next year. But no, in seriousness, getting back to the actual end of the occupation here, this is huge. I mean, it has been 20 years. To think of 20 years ago when this thing started, I was 11 years old, and now being a grown man and looking back and thinking what it would have been if I was an 11-year-old old in Afghanistan and had grown up through all this, what are the chances that I would still be alive? How much hell would my life be? And how much is the U.S. is responsible for that? Are a lot of important things to reflect on right now. Everybody really, and especially in the mainstream media, just wants to talk about the withdrawal, and it is news. It is important to talk about. There is reflection there for the U.S. government to figure out ways to, because we have other wars to end. There are ways to do this better. However, that is the smallest of the lessons to be learned. And none of it would have happened if we would have, learned the big lesson, especially from Vietnam, just not to do these interventions and these nation building efforts. And so that is the situation right now on the ground in Afghanistan. The Taliban control, I guess, all of the country other than the Panjshir Valley at this point, but they now control the Kabul airport too. After the U.S. left, the Taliban walked right in. There was some celebratory fire going off, but it doesn't seem like really too much else happened. In the aftermath of this, there have been a lot of pictures put out that were sensationalized, pictures of a couple Chinooks at the airport that the U.S. says that they've disabled, and so now it's really expensive scrap metal. There were some pictures of dogs that may or may not have been left by the U.S. at the Kabul airport. The U.S. Right now, I guess the Biden administration is disagreeing with the fact that those were dogs left by the military, but are in the care of a Humane Society agency in Afghanistan. I'm not exactly sure what's going on here, and continue to focus on this. There is this video, or some still pictures people are putting out, of a Black Hawk helicopter and what appears to be like a South American style hanging from that helicopter. This is not true. I'm not sure exactly what happened, but if you watch the video, you can see that this person is in a harness and is like scratching their head and clearly not dead and clearly not hanging. And so that video, or those photos, don't show what actually happened. There's a story that this was actually a pilot that was trained by the U.S. who was operating the helicopter for the Taliban, but I haven't been able to nail that down for sure. But that is a fake story. And so with the U.S. officially leaving, there's a lot of reports coming out that the Taliban has stepped up their atrocities and human rights abuses. I haven't seen any evidence to corroborate this yet. And in fact, in a lot of cases, it's turning out, it seems to me, to be like the helicopter pictures where it's very misleading and doesn't actually show what people are claiming it shows. And so I would be very skeptical of any of this information. With the U.S. exiting Afghanistan, all of our diplomatic personnel are also out. Those, operations have been shifted over to Doha and Qatar, where the Taliban do have a diplomatic presence as well. So I'm guessing the U.S. Will continue to communicate with the Taliban through Qatar. And there are a lot of outstanding issues as far as aid going to the Taliban, and if Afghanistan will receive aid under Taliban control. The Afghan government has a lot of assets that the U.S. has frozen, billions of dollars worth of potential IMF loans and stuff like that, funds that could be unfrozen, and I'm sure the Taliban will attempt to work with the U.S. to some extent to get access to those funds. There was like this portrayal that once the U.S. left, the Taliban would immediately go into massacre mode. I think if you're thinking the Taliban are only not committing human rights violations because they're concerned about the international backlash to it, I would guess that they're going to at least be careful until they get their funds released. And so I wouldn't suspect that the U.S. having personnel on the ground or not would have made a whole lot of difference. And that's one of the reasons I'm so suspect about these claims that the Taliban are suddenly going around killing people when it's potentially very valuable for them if they could get some of these funds released to at least maintain a good PR image up until now. Another thing to think about when considering if the Taliban are carrying out atrocities is just how cohesive and how much control the Taliban leadership has over all their, provincial, now governors or whatever they're calling them, their heads of the different districts and villages of Afghanistan. It may be that some of these people are hardline and are not following orders from the central Taliban in Kabul, who I guess Bardar is still the mullah who's de facto in control of Afghanistan at this point. Even if he's saying don't be cruel, there may be some people within the Taliban who act against that just because it's somewhat of a fractured thing, and a lot of this is built on somewhat unstable alliances that the Taliban are able to put together, changes of allegiances from just a couple of weeks ago. One thing to really hit on when we talk about Afghanistan here is that yes, the occupation is over. This is absolutely fantastic. It's a huge step towards ending the forever wars. However, Biden today, August 31st, in his speech, said the U.S. will continue its over-the-horizon capability in Afghanistan. This has nothing to do with the sunset. This has to do with the U.S. carrying out drone strikes or raids in Afghanistan. The most recent one, drone strike, was in Kabul, an example of one of these over-the-horizon capabilities, and it killed 10 innocent civilians, members of one family. There's a report that actually the two adult men who died in this attack were an Afghan translator and a former, I guess, Afghan army military officer, and then again 7 other children, including some young as 2 years old. And so, when we look at who's killing civilians in Afghanistan this past week, well, ISIS-K is one group, and the U.S. is the second group with this drone strike that I'm sure could really be considered a terrorist act. I mean, they dropped a bomb in the middle of a city and killed a bunch of children. Yet, the Biden administration is portraying this over-the-horizon capability as a good thing. Jen Psaki, Dave DeCamp at antiwar.com caught this. Jen Psaki, the White House press secretary, said that strike was a success. And so it's kind of disturbing how the Biden administration is portraying this and, saying that this over-the-horizon capability is a good thing when we know how the terrorism is going to be spread through these drone strikes. When you kill 7 children, that radicalizes people. That's a dangerous thing to do. And no matter how many bad guys you think you're taking out with these strikes, you'll often find people to take their place, especially if you continue to mount up the dead bodies of children in all of this. So that's, I guess, pretty much all the news I have going on the ground in Afghanistan. Again, there's a ton of reporting going out, a ton of sensational stuff, and from what I could tell, the major stories so far are untrue. Now, one other thing I want to get into on Afghanistan is this article by Matt Spoot in the Washington Post, where he says, the title here is, "Who's to blame for the deaths of 13 service members in Kabul? We all are." This is some pretty severe projection on the part of Matt Spoot. He is, if really anybody in the U.S. To point to, Matt Spoot is certainly very high on the list of reasons that these soldiers, young men and women, probably a half or a third of Matt Spoot's age, who were taken out by this Islamic State suicide bombing. So a couple things that Matt says in this article is Biden, Trump, and the American people are responsible. He says the fuse was lit 18 months ago when Trump signed the Doha Accord. This is absolutely untrue. The fuse was lit when the U.S. entered Afghanistan, decided to occupy that country and stay. That's why we've seen drone strike after drone strike bomb after bomb going off, targeting people in Afghanistan who were either Americans or American allies this whole time. And while for a good part of the war it was the Taliban, the U.S. actually ends up backing the Taliban by the end of this thing against the Islamic state group that carries out this attack. And so this is just a complete rewriting of history by Matt Boot. And again, he's the person that lit this fuse, not the American people for wanting to end this war. I guess one thing to point out is that had Biden stuck to the initial drawdown agreement and gotten troops out by May 1st of 2021, so a few months ago. And this Scott Horn makes this point so perfectly on Kennedy, his second appearance in a couple weeks. He did an absolutely great job by saying, had Biden stuck with that May 1st agreement, the Taliban would not have been anywhere as far ahead in their offensive as they were on, when the U.S. troops were at the Kabul airport. And so while you may have always had like an ugly situation at the Kabul airport, it very well may have been that there weren't U.S. soldiers there when the Taliban were taking over Kabul. And so, again, had it, the people who pushed Biden to stay, according to the original agreement signed by Trump, are certainly not the people that are responsible for this. Boot blames the collapse of the Afghan National Army on the fact that there was no maintenance of the aircraft. This is one of the most laughable points that he makes, to say that because the people of America wanted to end the war, and for that reason we pulled our contractors out of Afghanistan, and then the Afghan army had no air force, and that's why all this happened, is a complete mistelling of history. They had 20 years to train the Afghan National Army to maintain their own air force, and were unable to do it because what was prioritized was weapon sales and just, straight up corruption, right? Having contractors provide this maintenance on the planes rather than train the Afghans to do it ensures that American companies get billion-dollar contracts to deploy people overseas to do it. As soon as the Afghans were almost able to repair their own helicopters, of course, they were the old helicopters made by Russia. The U.S. had started to sanction Russia. And so we sold them a bunch of Black Ops helicopters that they had no ability to maintain. And so the failure to maintain the Afghan National Army and blaming down the American people is a laughable joke from Boot. And, it shouldn't really be able to be written in the pages of the Washington Post, just because it's obvious that these failures are because of the corruption and the military-industrial complex. He kind of tries to blame the Taliban for the Islamic State attack, even suggesting that it was maybe because of the Islamic Jihad, that they wouldn't want to prevent the Islamic State from being able to blow up U.S. soldiers. There's absolutely no evidence for this at all. And in fact, if anything, it's just like some mild racism from Matt Boot that, he's just able to assert, well, they're all Muslims and they all hate Americans, so I'm sure they're on the same side as this, and completely ignores the fact that the U.S. and the Taliban have figured this out and we're all on board with it. The U.S. has been supporting the Taliban in their operations against the Islamic State in Afghanistan with drone strikes. And so there's just no way to assert that because they're all Muslims are going to hate Americans together when, in reality that they've fought against each other, and understandably on the side of the Americans from the Taliban perspective. So then he says at the end, something I guess kind of correct, although kind of obvious, just that the options were to either stay forever or to leave. But Matt Boot would prefer to stay forever. That, he's written articles with this prescription laid out. He wants to fight this thing like the initial, U.S. war against the Native Americans. He wants to commit a genocide. He wants to, essentially say that anybody in Afghanistan who doesn't want to live how Matt Boot lives will be eliminated by the American government, and we're going to try to craft a society there no matter how many people we have to kill. This is the insanity of Matt Boot and the kinds of things that he's advocating and what he wants for Afghanistan. He says the leaders gave the American people what they wanted, and basically saying that, Biden should have ignored the will of the American people, not, and stayed in Afghanistan when obviously we needed to leave. So that's the boot article from the Washington Post. I just wanted to get into that because it's the height of unfairness. It makes me so mad that the people who lied us into these wars, the people who started these wars, who the whole time continued to lie to the American people so our government could continue to corruptly take all of our tax dollars, all of our hard work, and funnel it to their friends in the military industrial complex, the people in think tanks like Matt Spoot, and also just to give these people insane amounts of power over the entire world. They're reshaping Central Asia. They're reshaping the entire Middle East. They're reshaping huge chunks of Africa, Libya, Somalia, the Sahel region. They think they're gods, and they need to be brought down, and we cannot listen to these people anymore. They're dangerous. They're going to bankrupt us. They're going to kill a lot of people, and overall just make the whole world less safe for us. And so we have to continue to take on these thoughts, especially when they're given these mainstream major platforms and tell outright lies and try to blame the American people for the Afghan war. That again, he's one of the people responsible for making the American people so afraid that they're willing to go into all these stupid conflicts. Essentially, really help Osama bin Laden play out his grand strategy is what Matt Spoot has done for the past 20 years. All right, here we go, talking about some policing stuff. More and more places in the United States now, weed is legal, but it's not legal everywhere. And there's so many benefits to weed that I know, a lot of people think it may not be a bad idea, especially since it's not, super big deal anymore for people to smoke pot or something like that. Not a big deal maybe to send a friend back home some edibles on their birthday, or your grandma's having some trouble sleeping or with glaucoma or something, you want to send her some edibles. Well, be careful with that. There's this good article at Reason. Cops are dressing up like FedEx guys and arresting people for drugs. What's happening here is FedEx, I guess, has some kind of deal with police where they let them bring their drug dogs into sorting centers and just sniff all over the place. And as soon as a drug dog hits on something where they're nowhere near as accurate as they like to portray in the movies and on TV and all the propaganda that we hear, but anyways, they pretend like these drug dogs are infallible, and so just simply by sniffing a package and the dog, hitting on it, indicating to its handler that there's drugs in there. What the cops will do is they'll then dress up like FedEx people. I'm sure FedEx gives them the uniform and lets them borrow the truck. They go deliver the package, wait for the person to pick it up, take it inside their house, and then they go inside and raid the home. I don't know how this is not a warrantless search, how the person who picked up the bots and brings it inside their home had any idea that, there's drugs in there. Or that the police even knew there was drugs in there at the time, because all they have is one drug dog, hitting on the bots this one time. But anyways, so, you try to send your grandma some edibles and suddenly her house is getting raided and she's in handcuffs, has no idea what's going on, all because, some officer thought it would be a good idea to, arrest people over some marijuana being sent through FedEx. This is just, I think some of this become more and more common to mail a little bit of weed, and I just say be very careful with it, because I'm sure that the other major shipping companies, particularly the one with ties to the U.S. government, is doing stuff like this as well. So yeah, again, very disturbing stuff going on here. The other thing, just to get into this a little bit more, that I think is very disturbing about this is it's essentially a free ticket for a police to get into anybody's home. So there's this particular case in Kansas City where the police entered the home and then they saw guns and all this other stuff that they went and got a warrant for, that they should have never had the ability to get a warrant for in the first place. And basically, this seems like a free ticket to get into anybody's home the cops want, as long as they could get a drug dog to bark at a single box. Another thing going on with police in the U.S., and this again from Reason by J.D. Tusili, immigration activists targeted for deportation and harassment. His article is around this Washington University study that revealed a sustained campaign against critics or activist of the immigration policy, including circulating pictures, barring people from facilities, and surveilling people and deportating others. And so there are some more famous examples of this where there are people in the United States who are here illegally by U.S. law and will be an activist, and then the ICE guys will go and arrest them. And, the conservatives like to, play stupid games, win stupid prizes card on this. But there is really something wrong with the fact that this, part of our police system targets the people who are critical of them. But this isn't just limited to people who are actually in the U.S. illegally. This is also, taking on people and just harassing them who are working against this, U.S. police force. And so, I find this disturbing. I guess libertarians who have different views on immigration than myself, be more closed borders, may feel a little bit differently about arresting people who are in the country illegally and being activists. But at the same time, I find something disturbing about, this police force essentially, having the ability to deportate a lot of people who are opposed to it, and then all the other surveillance and stuff that goes on is pretty nasty. There's one other thing discussed in this article, and that is at the Hutto Detention Center in Texas, a woman says that she was sexually assaulted, and when she was reported this, she was then assaulted, threatened, and they attempted to force her to retract her statement, which she refused to do. But I'm sure this stuff goes on a lot more in the immigration centers, and it's probably just part of a system where when you let the police at this ruthlessly and with, essentially no checks, they could surveil and arrest and deportate all of their dissenters, all the their critics, then this creates a lot of problems and abuse within the police force. News on North Korea. So North Korea, of course, has nuclear weapons and has successfully tested nuclear weapons. They make their nuclear warheads with plutonium that they get from their Pyongyang reactor that is, I think, located like in the north of the country. There's a particular reactor in that complex, 5-MW, that produces the weapons grade plutonium as a byproduct. Now that reactor, at least there hasn't been any signs that it was in use since 2018. However, the international watchdog on nuclear weapons and nuclear programs, the IAEA, reported that there is some activity about wastewater that suggests that that nuclear reactor is once again active. And so it's possible that North Korea is firing up that reactor to make some weapons grade plutonium to maybe make a larger, a different kind of nuclear bomb. Although, we are jumping to conclusions, even if the reactor's on, maybe that's just an action by North Korea to try to generate some concern in the United States, because once North Korea did this, suddenly the Biden administration was interested in negotiations. Now, one of the unfortunate things is that the Biden administration essentially thought it could leave North Korea on the back burner, engage in the Obama-era strategic patience, and do nothing about North Korea for 4 years, while leaving a massive economic war in place against that country. Of course, North Korea wasn't going to have that, and Jessica Lee, who writes, at least I follow her at the Quincy Institute for Responsible Statecraft, is always all over this North Korea issue. One of my favorite commenters on North Korea. And she has this great article out basically saying, I told you so to the Biden administration, because she told the Biden team that, hey, we need to, be having serious negotiations with the North Koreans this whole time. So that's the thing she points out first that this is why it was smart to talk to the North Koreans before we had started to go down this road, where, they are looking to take provocative actions in order to try to engage the United States in talks. Now, she points out that the big problem is that the current Biden administration policy is one of rhetorical openness, but there is an unwillingness to compromise on key issues. And so this is almost the worst of kind of both worlds, because it's going to be portrayed in the mainstream media by the U.S. hawks that what is happening here is, the U.S. is extending an olive branch towards North Korea. But the crazy, insane, fat Kim Jong-un is just so ridiculous and so unbelievable that he won't, talk to us at all. And while the Biden administration is attempting a different route than Obama and Trump before him, look, we just can't do anything with the North Koreans. And this is the result of that. And it's just completely untrue, because the United States will not, under the Biden administration, under the Trump administration, reverse any of its demands of North Korea to go through a unilateral denuclearization. It's essentially to put themselves in a position where the U.S. or South Korea could easily invade and dominate the country. And rather, they're saying that no, the U.S. has to change their hostile policy before we consider giving up our nuclear weapons. And one of the very interesting things about this is the South Korean government seems far less concerned about North Korea and their nuclear weapons, as far as it being a reason to prevent them from engaging in diplomacy, and U.S. sanctions and the U.S. demand for North Korean denuclearization often get in the way of inter-Korean diplomacy. So that's a lot of what Jessica Lee has all laid out in her article. She has a great point in here, how the great power competition with China is interfering in being able to make any potential progress with the North Koreans. If the U.S. could work with China, could lean on China at all in the process with North Korea, it would give the U.S. some more, I think, flexibility in negotiation. However, because we constantly have our gun and are constantly provoking China, it makes it so that they're not going to work with the U.S. on anything. It's absolutely crazy. In the past week, we had this situation on one of China's borders where the U.S. is withdrawing from a 20-year war, and we're worried about our allies being left behind. A country that has influence in the region, China, is somebody that we could work with, but rather the U.S. is sailing ships through the Taiwan Strait. Same thing here with North Korea. If we're worried about their nuclear weapons, maybe one thing that we could do is, engage with the Chinese, who's North Korea's closest partner, to put pressure on North Korea not to, test weapons or restart this reactor, but rather, again, sailing the warship through the South Taiwan Strait, makes, I think, China far less likely to negotiate with the U.S. And so things that may be somewhat in the interest of the U.S. we can't even accomplish, because we're, trying to dominate the world and be hostile against everybody, and essentially want to be in a position where we only make unilateral demands of countries and they only comply because that's the only option. All right. I think that's all I have on North Korea. Before I wrap here, some stories on Yemen. The most important one is British lawyers mount bid for war crimes inquiry into Saudi Arabia coalition massacres in Yemen. The name in this group is Janica, I'm sure I'm mispronouncing this quite a bit, 37, Guernica 37. It's a London-based human rights group, and it has now submitted evidence to the ICC, the International Criminal Court, of 3 alleged war crimes where there were more than 140 Yemenis, including children, were killed and in some cases tortured. The lawyers are arguing the ICC needs to launch an investigation into the alleged crimes and are exploring the possibility of pursuing international arrest warrants against military leaders of the 6-year war, as well as bringing class actions against Britain and the United States. So this is something that we on this show, well, I guess, the old show, Foreign Policy Focus, I've been talking about, warning about since year 1 or 2 of this war in 2017. That is, essentially the U.S. was helping provide all the weapons, the mid-air refueling, the targeting, the maintenance, the warplanes for Saudi Arabia to wage this war, and they were doing things like targeting weddings, targeting funerals, targeting school buses, and supporting that kind of thing, may open you up to war crimes. And so very disturbing here that the U.S. has, continued to support Saudi Arabia all along. Now it may come back to bite some U.S. officials. Now, one important thing to note here is I don't think any of the countries that are being alleged to commit war crimes has signed on to the Rome Statute that gives the ICC jurisdiction. And so what I guess I'm hoping for here is maybe the ICC will do an investigation and produce a report that will be credible to people, showing how brutal this war in Saudi Arabia has been. I'm not really naive enough to think that anybody will be brought to justice because of this investigation. However, it could help turn the U.S. public support against this war and could help to end it. The 3 cases that this group is bringing before the ICC is an airstrike by the Saudi coalition against a school bus in August of 2018, killing 34 and maiming dozens more. This attack not only hit a school bus, but was in the middle of a market. I believe I've seen reports that up to 50 children died in this attack, but it does say in here that some of the children that were on that bus, their body parts were unrecognizable. So it may be they don't even have an actual count because, there's kids that were entirely incinerated, others where, only fingers or feet remain or something like that. The second one is a double missile attack launched in October of 2016 against a funeral gathering. This was in downtown Sana'a. It was attended by over 1,000 people. At least 110 people died in the attack, and there were over 600 life-changing injuries. One important thing to note here is that culturally in Yemen, funerals are important for different sides getting together. It's like there's a cultural truce at funerals, so people could get together and try to talk out whatever differences caused the funeral. Saudi Arabia dropping a bomb on this, I'm sure, was a real insult to the Yemeni people and their culture. And the third thing is the torture and murder of civilians in Aden. This is a southern city in Yemen, and the torture is alleged to have been done by Colombian mercenaries under the command of a U.S. private military company and contracted by the United Arab Emirates. And this is a story that I covered years and years ago, where the UAE was hiring this U.S. contractor who was hiring Colombians to go around southern Yemen and take out political people. These were straight up murders. These weren't like taking out terrorists or militants. These were taking out members of Yemen's Muslim Brotherhood. And then the war crimes talked about in the last one is widely reported by AP. They were going as far as tying people up over a fire and, essentially cooking them over a spit. It's reported that U.S. soldiers were aware of this and were submitting questions to the UAE to ask these tortured victims. And so I think there's a lot of room here for U.S. officials to be named and in my dreams held accountable, but at the very least, hopefully disgraced. Although, when you look at people like Matt Spoo, Paul Wolfowitz, and Robert Kagan being held up and allowed to speak up on Afghanistan, doesn't give one hope that even if we knew that the U.S. was involved in torturing people in Yemen, that we would even have any desire to hold those who did it accountable. Last up on today's show is some news about China. I already talked about this. The U.S. sailed a Coast Guard cutter and a Navy-guided missile destroyer. This was on August 27th through the Taiwan Strait. The Coast Guard. How could the Coast Guard be sailing through the Taiwan Strait? This is the far side of the Pacific Ocean from California. There's absolutely no need for the Coast Guard to ever have ships over there. But the fact that we would be selling those things through the Taiwan Strait is just so unnecessarily provocative. I'm sure to the Chinese seems a hell of a lot, like it does to me, which is essentially the Americans are claiming the Pacific Ocean as an American lake, and the Chinese could use it at the permission of the Americans. While we're sailing the ships through the Taiwan Strait, we have our Vice President Kamala Harris on maybe one for her first big, kind of foreign policy trips, heading to Vietnam and Singapore. In Vietnam, she made a whole bunch of promises. I think she delivered 6 million vaccine doses and said that the U.S. would give $23 million in COVID aid to Vietnam. She also offered $36 million over 5 years from USAID to help Vietnam, what they say, fight climate change. She offered more visits by U.S. warships. These would be destroyers and aircraft carriers. I'm not quite sure if Vietnam wants this, but by, kind of the United States establishment Warhawk worldview, their idea is that we sail these ships, to Vietnam. We sail them through the Taiwan Strait to show China, or not maybe the Taiwan Strait, but also like the South China Sea and the territories that Vietnam claims in order to, show China that we're tough and we mean business. She said that the U.S. was concerned about countering China in the South China Sea, and needs the U.S. and Vietnam need to work together to increase pressure on China. The last thing, I guess, of really interesting note to Kamala's visit to Vietnam was that it was actually delayed today because there was some strange symptoms that somebody at the U.S. Embassy in Ho Chi Minh City exhibited. This was blown up into Havana syndrome, and that was trending for a day. Completely dropped off the radar. I'm sure the person just had a headache and was a fake thing as always. I kind of thought that this was maybe going to be spun into some kind of hero story for Kamala Harris. But maybe all the news on Afghanistan really prevented that from happening. The U.S. Also offered to deploy a third Coast Guard cutter to Vietnam, again asserting that now the South China Sea, as well as the entire Pacific Ocean, is some kind of American lake. In Singapore, and we have a write-up here from the typical co-host of the show, Will Porter, and Will writes that VP Harris says Beijing threatens rules-based order and national sovereignty, and in broadside on China during Singapore visit. And so, he hits on a lot of the big stuff here, that this was rhetorical. China's bad. They violate the rules-based international order, and they violate country sovereignty, even though, say, like Yemen, Somalia, Iraq, Syria are all countries that want the U.S. to leave, and yet we're there bombing it against those countries' will. So this is just a bunch of hypocrisy. Here she says that we also need to confront China, very similar rhetoric around human rights and needing peace, stability, and the freedom of seas in the South China Sea. I think this is a real effort to build up Kamala Harris' international, record and portfolio. I'm not sure she's going to see any real success out of it, although it'll likely be spun that way. Last story I have today is from antiwar.com by Dave DeCamp. U.S. military officials claim China will surpass Russia as a nuclear threat. Now, in one way, this doesn't make any sense at all. China maintains an arsenal of around 300 to 350 nuclear weapons, while Russia has 600. However, at a certain point, all these nuclear weapons are overkill. And if the U.S. is really looking at, picking a fight with China, then China's nuclear arsenal, may surpass Russia as a nuclear threat to the United States, but that's only because of U.S., in my interpretation, U.S. hostile policy actions. All right, everybody, that's what I have for the show today. Hope you enjoyed the show. Again, we have such great momentum. Help us keep it up. Share the show wherever you're listening. Be sure that you are subscribed to the show, especially if you're listening on YouTube, watching on YouTube. People get subscribed from there, unsubscribed all the time. Double check, make sure you're subscribed. If even better if you're switching over to Rumble or Odyssey to watch the show. That way, when the inevitable censorship happens, you're not subject to it. You're getting your regular conflicts of interest content as always. Check out the pages on Facebook, MeWe, and Twitter. My Twitter handle is at Kyle Anzalone _ at Cotton _ interest for the show. Donate Patreon, Subscribestar, buy your CBD at Pluma Verde. We also take Bitcoin. Check out the show notes page. Thanks, everyone.